Hello, welcome to another episode of This Old Deck. So slightly a different approach on this one, just to make things a little bit more interesting. It's not the first time I've done a compare and contrast between two similar decks, but I'm just going to take it down slightly different rabbit hole here, so these videos don't all just become more of the same. Both of these decks come out of Deconstruction Companion, and both of them are in the permission section of the book, and I'll include links in the description for so if you're not familiar with the two books that I'm drawing most of these decks out of for the series, you can get familiar with them. What I will say is that part of my list in the description will appear in all videos, both before this and going forward. In addition to, I will include all of the shortcuts to all of these searches in Scryfall, so you can sort of go through and do your own explorations and maybe look at stuff I didn't cover, just because of the way this is going. So my plan is to look at a steel disc deck from the European Championship in 1998. And, you know, compare and contrast it a bit with CMU Blue, which was played at Worlds 98. Now, if you go onto MTG Wiki, you'll notice that this version of it is listed as one of the 4 World Championship decks that Wizards released. So it's available in a gold border version. It was played by Randy Buehler, who got 12th place. The other decks they feature in that release of Precons was the Brian Selden deck, which was a deck called, I think, Cali Nightmare. Then there's the finalist, the other finalist deck, which is Ben Rubin, who played a Sly deck. And the quarterfinalist deck, Brian Hacker's deck, it was White Weenie. And the Randy Buehler deck was a Draw Go deck. Now, both of these are examples of Draw Go, and that's why I picked them. So one was earlier in 98, one was a little bit later. Now I'm treating these as a continuation, but obviously in real life what probably happened is there was some interim decks between the two that they evolved. I just wasn't around at that time. Well, I was around. I just wasn't playing Magic in 98. So I don't know the intricate, causal evolution of these two decks, apart from the fact that this one came before this one, but there may well have been some interim builds between the two, and that's important because what we're going to do is we're going to look at what cards were removed from the deck to get it to this deck, and what cards, of which there aren't many actually, that were added in. So they must have rebalanced the deck by increasing some of the cards that were previously in the steel deck, or the steel disc deck. But also I'm going to be talking about some key cards that were in both decks. Not all of them, although we will see both decks, so we'll get to cover all the cards, but just in terms of the drilling down I'm doing. And this episode is going to be a little bit more focused on reprints of the cards, because I must admit I did a dry run of this. Well, it wasn't a dry run, I just forgot to hit the record button. And I then, when I realised, I thought actually, it was working quite well with the bits where I was talking about the differences in the reprinting, stuff like that. But I will still go down some of the tags for just really the Scryfall tag side of things, because it connects in nicely with decks I've previously done if I do that. So what was in the steel disc deck? We have, if we order these by mana value on a grid, and by category, if we group them by category, we got 4 Nevinaral's Disc. So 4 to cast, comes into play tapped. 1, tap it, destroy all artifacts, creatures and enchantments. 4 of the only creature in the deck, which is also an artifact. 3 to cast, it's a 3/4 steel golem. And you cannot play summon or artifact creature spells. We've seen this card before The other thing you'll notice is this is a mono blue deck. So the rest of the spells in the deck are instants. So we have 2 brainstorms. So for a single blue, we get to draw 3 cards, then put any 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. 4 force spikes, 1 blue, counter target spell unless its caster plays an additional 1. So it's an example of one of these soft counter spells, I think they're called. 2 power sinks, X and a blue, counter target spell unless its caster plays an additional X if he or she does not tap all mana producing lands that player controls and remove all mana from his or her mana pool. 4 Whispers of the Muse, single blue instant with buyback 5 and draw a card. So for this, we buy back 5. You can play an additional 5 when you play the spell, and if you do, you get to put it back into your hand instead of the graveyard as part of the spell's effect. There's 4 counter spells, 2 blue, counter target spell, pretty straightforward. 4 impulses, 1 and a blue. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library. Shuffle your library afterwards, so you get a bit of top deck manipulation going on there. 2 memory lapses, 1 and a blue, counter target spell, but when the spell's countered, it goes back on top of its owner's library. Notice that some of these are interrupts and some are instants. Now all of these interrupts have been errated to instants, and I think that was as a result of changes to the stack that were made in, was it 6th edition? I think that's where that happened. So after that point, you definitely didn't see interrupts anymore. But if you look at these cards, you may notice, if we go through ones, when we go through the counter spells, you may notice that if we do we get to talk about, we talk about counter spells towards the end. You'll notice that, what it is, the type changes if it's been reprinted after that point. So 3 dissipates, 1 and 2 blues, counter target spell. This one, when you target the spell, it gets exiled, so remove that spell card from the game. 1 forbid, 1 and 2 blue with the buyback cost of choosing and discarding 2 cards. Counter target spell, and then dismiss 2 and 2 blue, counter target spell, withdraw a card on it. So it's a card draw with a counter spell. We've got 14 islands, 4 quicksands, which generate colourless mana, but also you can sack them. Target attacking creature without flying gets -1, -2 until end of turn. 3 stalking stones. You can add colourless mana to your mana pool, but also pay 6 and it becomes a 3/3 artifact creature permanently. And there's 3 Sphelionite Temples. Comes into play tapped. Tap, add blue to your mana pool. Tap, sacrifice it, add double blue to your mana pool. There is a sideboard. I'm not going to go through any of the sideboard cards, individually drill down through them. I just wanted to put them in here so you get an idea of what the meta may have been like at the time, because obviously the sideboard cards were picked to deal with certain matchups. So you might notice we've got another counter spell here that does instants, interrupts or sorceries only, so single blue. It is a soft counter spell because then the caster can get round it by paying an additional 1 mana. However, at the very minimum, you get to draw a card off of this. 4 Hydroblasts, counter target spell if it's red, or destroy target opponent if it's red. So you'll notice there's several cards in here which in some way hate on red. We've got 4 Chills, 1 on the blue. Red spells cost an additional 2 to play. It's an enchantment that sits in play. And then we've got Sakura Firewalker, 1 and 2 blue. Can't be the target or else, but red spells or effects. Tap, deals 1 damage to target creature or player, so it's a pinger. And we've got Legacy's Allure, which allows you to grab your opponent's stuff. 2 blue, during upkeep you may put a treasure counter on Legacy's Allure, sacrifice it, permanently gain control of a target creature with power no greater than the number of treasure counters on Legacy's Allure. So, the other thing, when I went through this in the book, there seemed to be a typo in that the number of cards in the main deck only added up to 59. So what I did was I just added an extra island for this deck, but it could have been an addition to any of the other cards which have not exceeded their maximum allowed amount. So maybe one of the counter spell cards or one of the blue spells had an extra copy that isn't correctly noted in the book, or maybe there were 14 islands instead of 13. Who knows? But I just put that out there. So what cards were removed to get it from here to the CMU blue version? Well, out goes Steel Golem. So it's only been reprinted one other time in Magic. So there was a Weatherlight version in the deck. It's been reprinted for 10th edition. You can't play summon or artifact creature spells. If we quickly go down the Scryfall Tagger rabbit hole, you can see that it's similar to a grid monitor. And there are quite a number of spells that prevent casting in some way. But this is in here not because of its ability, its downside. It's because you need something in the deck to finish off your opponent. You're playing a draw go deck. So the idea is that, you draw a card and then you pretty much go. Obviously you're going to play any lands, but most of the action is occurring on the opponent's turn where you're playing instants or as also interrupts, as they would call back then, some of them, to counter your opponent and to control their board state in various ways. So that ultimately you can get them to a point where they're finding it really difficult to do anything, and then your solitary Steel Golem in play, because once you have this in play, of course you can't then play any other artifacts or summon spells in the deck through playing them. I mean, there are other ways, it says down here, there are other ways of getting creatures onto the battlefield. But yeah, so in this deck, it's obviously going to restrict you, but there's not many copies of this. So you just got one of these in play and you're sort of whittling your opponent away. Bear in mind, you do also have the standing stones here. Yeah, so this in this particular version is limited to its offence, I suppose, is limited to. Sorry, did I say standing stones? I meant stalking stones. Sorry if I've already called it standing stones. But yeah, it's stalking stones. It's the stalking stones and the Steel Golem. So yeah, a lot of counterspell stuff. Brainstorm came out. Yep, card draw. And if we look at this, you can see we've got our Ice Age version there. So we would be on the timeline. I've actually got this right. Is it gonna? Yeah, there, 5th edition. Now, of course, one thing we could have done at the time, if we were playing at the time, is as long as the card is legal in the format we're playing, which I'm assuming would have been standard, we can play any version of the card. So yeah, there could have been an Ice Age version of the card in that particular deck on that particular tournament. Who knows? But interesting to look the point at which they stopped printing Brainstorm for a while. So we do get it in Macadian Masks, and it was in a World Championship from 2000. That was a beatdown box set. We've got some versions that were like Friday Night Magic cards. This was from a Cold Snap theme deck. If you remember, they did this thing where they took cards from Ice Age and Alliances and included them in the theme decks, but reprinted them in the Modern Borders. We get this quite nice one from Legacy Championship artwork. Was reprinted for Vintage Masters, although Vintage Masters was online only. It's in the 25. I'm just seeing if they've reprinted that in like a regular set. Yeah, a lot of times you'll notice Brainstorm hasn't turned up in like a, you know, regular standard set. Looks like it's mainly special printings or pre-cons, or like special aggregate sets and such like. Now if we sort of drill down through the Scryfall tagger, well, quite honestly, it's, you know, a Brainstorm effect. So similar to Ponder and things like Preordain, although both of them got sort of slight twist on things. Also Worse Than an Ancestral Recall, which you just get to draw 3 cards for single blue. And then there's obviously a whole group of Brainstorm, you know, top deck manipulation cards over Magic's history, including Jake the Mind Sculptor, Jace the Mind Sculptor. And maybe a bit easier if I actually do the first printing here. There we go, that's better. Sylvan Library. There's Dream Cache. I think I featured that in a an earlier episode when I was doing this in the format of the Deck Durdle, something like that. And we got Brain Surge, Brainstone. So a lot of these, you know, like play on Brainstorm. Okay, Power Sync. You can see quite a few variants of this. There's Mirage. Where's R1? So it was in Tempest, but it was also in 5th edition as well. When I put these lists together, I tended to include the most recent version of the card that would have been legal in standard at that point. So in this instance, there's actually 2 versions of the card that were in standard. But of course, as I pointed out before, if a card's legal in standard, you can play any version of it. So equally, this may have been in the deck. But this one hadn't been released yet, the one from Urza Saga. Then we get this interesting version, which is in 6th edition, which I think I mentioned before. And it's cropped up since then on the list. So you can see after this period that we're talking about, yeah, Power Sync, it's not really been reprinted that much. If we just look at some of the stuff down here, so a few rules text, because we've got this interesting ability on here, so just some clarification there about, you know, type of lands, what happens when the spell resolves, and stuff to do with increasing the mana cost of the spell. Sort of things that are useful to know for certain card interactions. Yeah, it is a soft counter spell because there is an out. You're giving the other player a chance to buy off the counter. and there are 132 of those in Magic. This also, through its action, will tap down lands. And of course this is in the context of that particular spell, what it does, but tapping down lands appears all over the place. Only 103 times, but in different, what would you call it, connotations, I suppose. It's also under mana ability matters, of which there are only 8. Because it's referencing mana producing lands. And we get this card. Severally Unite Temple. I always have trouble pronouncing this. Can't even say pronounce now. It's got a C in it. Pronounce. So if you look at it, you can see originally in Fallen Empires was reprinted for 5th edition with different artwork. Was in 6th edition, was also in the Beatdown box set. Online they've done it, as in a couple of the Pro Tour collected set decks. So it's like you could think of it as an early version of what they tried to do with the Worlds deck, but for the Pro Tour. And it's interesting, I was just if I drill through these, you'll see that this is part of something referred to as the what would that be? Fallen Empires Sacklands, that's it. So if I do is first print, I discovered today as well that you can just do first print, you don't have to do first printing. So we get this here. Now if you compare and contrast that and do, it's probably a bit easier if I do something like this and order it by release date and then ascend it. You can sort of see where I'm going with this. So here's the cycle and the artwork as it appeared in Fallen Empires. We then get certain cards cropping up from the cycle. This is in the Pro Tour collector set, obviously based on the decks that were picked for that particular group, and which ones featured which one part of the cycle. I think it looks like all of them had, so they've all appeared at least once in that particular group of decks. We then get the 5th edition one, which are different artwork. That's pretty cool. I think the versions I have, if I indeed have this cycle, and I'm trying to remember, they were printed at Uncommon. Not sure if I have those or not. I can't remember, but this set looks pretty interesting, the artwork on here. So 5th and 6th had different, the same artwork, but it was different from Fallen Empires. And then they were reprinted, or some of them were reprinted, 4 out of the 5 for the Beatdown box set, obviously again just appearing in relevant decks. They put them in Masters Edition 2 so they'd be available on Magic the Gathering Online, and then we get the odd ones here, one in these all foil premium decks and then a couple in Commander products. So if we move on to, actually before I do that, one thing I did want to look at is adding multiple mana, and also just as a sort of what do you call it? Well, I think I might have mentioned this before, but anywhere where there's land in sets, or groups of land in set that appears, where there's like cycles at multiple rarities. That's what I'm trying to say. So, you know, a cycle at common, a cycle at uncommon, cycle at rare. They're the ones that are most likely to appear in my Scryfall Shenanigans episodes, because they're really cool to do if you've managed to find sets like that. So if I haven't covered them already, at some point in the future, I will cover sets where there's that, you know, cluster of non-basic lands at every rarity. But also I do have made sure now I start to feature the basic lands as well in any of those episodes. So keep an eye open for those if you particularly like the land ones. So yeah, similar to Ancient Spring, similar to Brazen Skerry. Now the other thing is this idea of adding multiple mana, and I'm curious as to how many cards in Magic that is a thing for. Is first print. Yeah. Misha's Workshop. There we go. Now, of course, if you're familiar with these, the Urza lands, you'll know that the additional mana, you know, kicks in under certain scenarios. So just remember that. And that's also going to include instances where it's, you know, 1 mana and then 1 colourless mana as well. And again, just it might be different circumstances why, say, the mana scales as well, or because there's depletion counters on it, those sort of things, or scales off of the type of lands or other types of land as well. Or maybe it's got more than 1 mana because it generates 2 colours of mana simultaneously. So interesting to see those sort of cards through Magic. But, you know, every one cycle is quite different in, you know, that respect, I suppose. Okay, moving on to this one. So CMU Blue, it's called in the book. If you look on the MTG Wiki article for World Championship decks from 1998, I'll include a link to that. It's just called Draw Go, which is the category they've got it in the book, actually. So, but if you have this book, yeah, it's in the basically it's in the permission section, in the Draw Go subsection, and this is what it's called. Okay, so let's go through. So we know what cards got taken out to get here, and then we'll get onto cards that were put in, but you'll probably spot them already. So Never Arnold's Disc was still in here. We've got an edition of Rainbow Efreet. There's actually only 2 cards that came in. Several went out, but what they did as well is obviously they increased the count of certain cards to make up the difference, because you'll notice in the original deck they weren't playing 4 of everything. There's 4s and 2s and 3s and 1s, I think. So we've got 4/4 spikes, counter target spells, caster spells and additional 1. So that was one of the soft counter spells. Whispers of the Muse, still got 4 of these. That's the one with buyback on it. 4 counter spells, 4 impulses. You can see our Brainstorm's gone away, our Steel Golem's gone away, our Power Sink has gone away. We've got 3 Mana Leaks, which has been added in. 1 in the blue, counter target spell unless its caster pays an additional 3. There's 1 Memory Lapse, still in here. 1 in the blue, counter target spell, put that spell on top of the owner's library. 2 Dissipates, Dissipate's still in here. 1 and 2 blue, counter target spell, remove that spell card from the game. 3 Forbids. So I think for that, looks like, was that the one where they changed the yeah, that only had 1. So 3 Forbids, 1 and 2 blue. That's the one with the buyback where you choose and discard 2 cards. Counter target spell. And then 4 Dismisses. Counter spell with draw a card on it. They removed one of the lands. we've got 18 islands, 4 quicksands, 4 stalking zones. In this deck was correct in the book. I didn't have to fiddle around with anything. Sideboard in here. So we've got 4 wastelands, so we can use it to just generate colourless mana, but we can use it to blow up non-basic lands. 1 grindstone, interestingly enough. 1 to cast, 3 tap it, put the top 2 cards of target player's library into that player's graveyard. If both cards share at least 1 colour, repeat this process. So really useful, again, in a situation where you're going to sideboard in, because you know the opponent's playing like a mono-coloured deck, and you can start sort of milling their deck as well. 4 Hydroblasts, so that was in the sideboard for the other deck originally, actually. 4 Sea Sprites, 1 and a blue, flying protection from red. So again, we've got a couple of, well, this one we had, the other one we had 3 spells, didn't we? This one we've got two spells that go up against red stuff. And then we've got Capsize, 1 and 2 blue, another buyback card. This will bounce target permanents back to owner's hand. There's buyback of 3 on this one. You'll also notice I'm not going to talk specifically or go down any rabbit holes for the sideboard. So the 2 cards that came in, Rainbow Efreet, has flying and phases out. It was only ever printed again in that championship deck. And it, as you can see, is a phasing card. So there's 71 cards individually in Magic's history that have phasing on them, without getting into, like, you know, reprints or necessarily alternative arts where there's multiple on a set. And the idea goes way back to Ubilit. Now on this one, it mentions phasing on the errata text. You can see the original doesn't. I'm assuming, yeah, for some of the reprints that were done after it was errated, it does mention phasing. And you can see by the time we get to Tempest, we're mentioning phasing. And there's a lot of phasing stuff in Tempest. All the way through, you can see some Vision stuff, of which this is the set that it's from. And there's a few in Weatherlight, so it's getting less and less across the subsequent sets. And we get a few here and there. It did appear in a core set here on Teferi, and crops up in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, both in the set and Commander. Got it in Innistrad Midnight Haunt, but you can see pretty spread out later on in Magic. There's not that same sort of denseness that you see, you know, in really early Magic, back in that era of Mirage. Okay, I'm back on the wrong one. And yeah, it was the evasion. And evasion can take different forms. So creatures that are harder to block through keywords, flying, menace, or other means. You might also see something, I don't know if the term's used quite so much now or not, but pseudo-evasion. So sometimes it might partially block something. So it might let some of the damage get through under certain circumstances. So the other card that was put in is Mana Leak. So this interesting soft counterspell. So you can see with Mana Leak, it's interesting when we look at it on a printing timeline. So here it is in Stronghold. That's the championship deck version, because as I've said, this deck was featured as one of the 4 decks for the 98 version of these. There was one previously, 97, and I think I also mentioned there was a Pro Tour one. as well in the early days. And that World Championship deck series ran from 97 through to 2004, and we've covered a few of them. So some interesting Arena League stuff. So that would be the first instance where you could get it in foil. We got 8th edition. This would be the foil version, I'm assuming. Black borders, or the foil ones were always black border, I think. Crops up again in 2003 championship decks and 2004. Then there's these ones. I don't know if anybody remembers these, but this would be a Magic Player Rewards card. These started appearing, like full art, no rules text, no reminder text, no flavour text. 9th edition. The first time I would have seen it in a set where I'd sort of opened cards would have been 11th, I think, yeah. M11. I went to call it 11th edition, M11. It was also in M12 and crops up in a few other places. But apart from the list, like, it's only, you're not going to see it in a regular set up till now. There's another one of those for arts. What's that? Oh, they did some ones for online. Yeah, that's right. They did MTGO ones as well, didn't they? So, just if we go down a little rabbit hole here. Yep, soft counterspell. Similar to Miscast. Okay. Similar to Reduce to Rubble. Similar to Spare Pills. Now, one thing I noticed, and Convolute, is it's part of something called a Mana Leak series. Soft counter spells with CMC N that cost N. And you can sort of order this in different ways. You can sort of see the how this all sort of holds together. So, we've got the, let's just do first printing. So that will be in the order in which they released. Mana value version, yeah. And you can see if you put it in mana version, apart from this one, you can see, for the ascending mana value, the mana cost, we've got an ascending in the sort of soft part of it. So it's slowly costing more for the opponent to nerf the spell. Difference with this one is this is non-creature spells. All of these are just any target spell. If we also do this, we get quite a nice idea about what ones of these have been reprinted more than others. So we can see, like, Mana Leak, yeah, it's been reprinted quite a few times in here before we even see something like a Convolute or a Spell Pierce. And some more Mana Leak. Then we have Mind Static, Dragon's Maze, and then various Mana Leak in a dual deck, Mana Leak in Tempest Remastered, Modern Masters. We've got Convolute reprint in Eldritch Moon, and so on. There's quite a nice one here for Amonkhet Invocations for a Spell Pierce, almost unrecognisable. But if you haven't noticed already, you'll probably notice that and if I go in to, where is it? Where is it? Not Convolute, one of these. Oh, there we go. Mind Static. Yeah, only ever printed in Dragon's Maze. So that's the only one that hasn't been reprinted at the moment. So yeah, just Rainbow Efreet and Mana Leak were added in. The others were taken out, and then the deck adjusted accordingly to make it up to 60 cards between the two. Because you can see sort of, more individual cards came out than went in. So a few cards were rebalanced. I thought I'd just go through some of the cards that are common to both decks. I'm not going to go through every single counterspell that's common. We'll just talk about one, i.e. counterspell, and also impulse, which is a sort of filter, I suppose. So yeah, Nevereinal's Disc is in the deck. And that's been, there's 34 versions of this through Magic's history. And you can see it was also in the Pro Tour Collector's set previously. The Randy Butte one is right down here. So there's been quite a few printings of it in various guises up to here. So all through the, ABU period, Alpha Beta Unlimited, into Revised Edition, into 4th edition, into 5th edition in terms of stuff that was available in boosters. We get it in anthologies, and then it starts cropping up in Commander product after quite a big gap. So yeah, start getting super popular in Commander. And if we, just for the sake of consistency, it doesn't really matter here, but if we go in through the 5th edition one, see what we've got tagged at. So yeah, sweeps, artifacts, enchantments and creatures, and of course there are cards that just do each of these individually or modally or together, like this does. It's also on Mages of the Disc, right, stapled to it. You can see there, when this dies, you can pay 1, and when you do, destroy all artifacts, creatures and enchantments. Interesting mirrored version of this. 4 tap it, exile it, and then return to the battlefield tapped all artifact, creature, enchantment and land cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Commonly nicknamed namesake spell. There's quite a number of those in Magic. Quicksand. So 9 printings of Quicksand. Here's our one. There it is in the Randy Bueller deck with the gold border. And then suddenly turns up in 9th edition, 10th edition, World Wake, Conspiracy, and then we don't really see it. Yeah, it's in the Masters 25 and then Visions. For some reason, I don't know why, I thought this was in a Commander deck. I don't know what made me think that, but it's not. And the first time I probably saw it was this one. Probably opened some packs. Notice there's a so here, if we go into this version, what is this? This is uncommon. So there was a rarity change here. We went to common. And then since then, back up to uncommon. And in the list, it's the Visions version. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Change the rarity. So I must have pulled it if I opened, well, I did open World Wake stuff. But there's a pretty good chance I pulled these. I did open quite a lot of 10th edition, so I know I've got copies of this. Not sure if I've got 9th edition or the Visions version or not. I have to look through my binders. And if you're curious for the tagging side of things, because I know we're focusing a little bit more on the historical timeline for this episode, yeah, hates on attackers, 337 cards that hate on various attackers under various scenarios. Sacrifice itself, utility land. I know this is something we've been through tons of time now. I'm fascinated by the utility lands. In some instances, there are some early Magic cards where it's just pure utility and no mana, but quite a lot of these are going to be combination, like this card of both being able to generate mana and having utility on it. Stalking Stones, which I probably at least once may have incorrectly called this standing stones, which I often do. So 6 different versions of that in Magic's history. Here's our one, Randy Buehler version, and then we've got mirrored in the dual deck Smith versus Tezzeret. I should get those out, actually, they're really interesting to look through. Tempest Remastered, and then from the list the one from Mirrodin. I can't remember which artwork or whether I've got both in my binder. I think I've got these off somewhere. Yeah, this has always intrigued me. So we've got a couple of rules abilities here, because we're taking it from one thing and turning it into something else. But you'll notice with these, there's 49 creature lands in Magic's, lands that animate themselves. But you probably notice the wording's interesting. It becomes permanently. It's an untracked, indefinite effect on there. So that's interesting. If you look at it on, from the perspective of things like, first time in Magic you saw that, but also another way of, release date, sorry, ascending. Yeah, so we've got the laces. But the other thing I thought was interesting is what about on a land? Like, how common is that to have that on a land? So that's the sort of thing you see if you do that. Don't forget these are double-sided. And that's an enchantment land. So not very is the answer. Another interesting thing you can do is, put these on a timeline through Magic's history and sort of see how you get clusters of these. So Stalking Stones was its own thing in the set, but the first time you saw it as a cycle would have been these ones from Urza's Legacy, and that was a cycle of mono-coloured ones. And then the dual lands, so the Celestial Colonnade and the other ones that turned up in World Wake there were 5 of them, and they were just the 2-colour allied. And then the enemy version we saw in Battle of Zendikar. But again, you get these odd ones cropping up in sets like Inkmoth Nexus, and then a few here and there individual ones that become creatures, and then we get another group of monocoloured ones in what would this be? Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. We get some 2-colour enemy ones in Wilds of Eldraine, and then them in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but these are allied ones, and then again the odd one here and there. So I've sort of, maybe I've ruined that a bit for a future Scryfall Shenanigans episode. I didn't think of that. I could have done creature lands in the history of Magic. Oh well, never mind. I'll have to put it off for a few years. Counterspell. So I didn't want to go through all of the counterspells that are in both decks, but I thought I might as well go actually look at the the OG counterspell. So yeah, it's an interrupt back then. Alpha Beta Unlimited. We go into Revised. You can see there's various variants here in other sets. 4th edition. Interestingly, there's an Ice Age version. We've got Pro Tools Collector's Set. Then we get it here in 5th edition. And it comes up in the 97 Championship decks. The copy they've got in the Randy Buehler deck is the Tempest version. That's the one they've got. could have used any of these when it was legal in standard. So, yeah, Classic 6th turns up in Macadian Masks, in the Battle Royale version, and then 7 we get a foil version with different artwork. World Championship decks 2001. They include the Macadian Mask one. And then really, when you look at it, it's mostly here we can see, you know, special sets, aggregate sets, special printings. But I don't see it appearing in a set that would be, you know, you'd be able to use in, say, standard, if I'm correct. So yeah, kept well out of standard after, what was it, 7th edition. And, you know, if we're curious on this, oops, I don't know what I was going to do now. Yeah, I want to just drill down through this actually. Just do this one for speed. Yeah, so it's a counter spell, but as you can see, there's quite a number here. Better Than, Disruption Protocol, Long River's Pull, Mystic Denial, Silumgar's Scorn, Wizard's Retort, Cancel. So that was the 1 and 2 blue. So Cancel, I suppose, took over. There's, you know, later core sets had Cancel in it instead of Counterspell. Ice Out, which is Better Than. Worse Than Mana Drain, 2 blue counter target spell at the beginning of your next main phase. Add an additional mana of any colour equal to that spell's mana value. Better Than Nullify and Better Than Stoic Rebuttal. You can see here this does target creature or aura spell for 2 blue. Whereas our friend Counterspell does any target spell. Yep, Counterspell, 521. Spells that counter stuff. And you've got Counterspell Soft as well, which we've looked at. In terms of, you know, putting Counterspell the tag on a timeline of first printings, okay, so we've got Counterspell Sacrifice. Let's just see if we can do that. There we go. 521. You always have to check there because I noticed there's slightly different tags. Yeah, sacrifice a creature to counter a target summon. That's why they've got that particular designation. If I was to... It's interesting that it calls it that there, but it's actually hyphenated in the actual tag. When you click on that, if you look, see? Oh no, that's... What happened there then? Ah, I know what I did. Yep, sorry. I clicked the wrong thing, that's why. Changed over. I have to watch out for that. I keep forgetting it does that. Yeah, that's more like it. That's what I was supposed to do. Okay, yep, same thing. I wondered that, yeah, why it changed it. And of course I didn't realise it was because one of my autocompletes had it in there. It's been bugging me for a while and I couldn't work out what's going on. Okay, and then finally Impulse. And of course there's a number of other cards here, but I think I could have gone through that had some commonality But I didn't want to go crazy, do everything. And again, I'll include links to all of this stuff so you can go down your own sort of little rabbit holes. So 14 cards, printings of Impulse. Here's our one. You can see it was actually used in another deck in the World Championship 97, the previous year. And so this is a 98 Randy Buehler one. And then really, I mean, if you look at this, have we ever seen it being printed again in a regular set? I don't think so. It was in Domineer Remastered. But, oh, Domineer United. So it was in Domineer United. Okay. Right. Fair enough. But isn't that the only one? All the others are like special sets or precons. And if we drill down through here, we'll end up, if you go down the right rabbit hole, at a card we previously looked at. So just from here, just looking at a few things, so Better Than Anticipate, Better Than Shimmer of Possibility, similar to Thieves' Fortune. If we go into card selection, it's the only card in here. If we go into Impulse as a tag in here, so Impulse is first printing, and just again put it on a timeline. You think, if you've seen the previous episode, I did the deck I featured, you may know why I'm doing this. So Browse, you can see, look, it got it actually on an enchantment. It's really interesting. So this is an episode I did on Browse Digger deck. So yeah, there's Impulse there. Oh yeah, interesting thing to look at, that sort of, Impulse type effect, because it is an interesting type of selection. So you're looking at the top 4 cards of your library, putting one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. Shuffle your library afterwards. The only difference is when we look at one thing to point out here, if you didn't see my previous episode on the Browse Digger stuff, you'll notice with Browse you're actually removing the remaining 4 from the game, which is different than in Impulse where you're putting on the bottom of your library. So that other one on Browse, you're going to thin out your library as well, thin out your deck. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that sort of compare and contrast, and maybe a slightly different way of going down rabbit holes. I'll try and keep mixing it up for different episodes of this series, but I'll also make sure I include the links so that if there was anything you think, oh, I wish I'd gone down that, then yeah, you can just fiddle around yourself. So that'd be really handy. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.